everybody. Welcome back to another episode of No More Silos. My name is Erika, and this is my podcast. So today in the land of cultural Christianity, we are talking about the books that made the most impact on me this year, 2023, and which books I am looking forward to reading in 2024, the first part of 2024, I guess. So trying to narrow down a list of books, and y'all know me, I'm all over the whole book thing, and I'm literally going to share right out of my Amazon wish list the books that I will probably purchase in the next week or two, because any packages coming to the house right now look like Christmas gifts, so no one will notice that I'm buying more books. Shh, do not tell my husband. So I still have a few leftover Amazon gift cards from my birthday 6 months ago that I'm still using. And so I thank God for each and every person that supports my book habit. And I thank God for each and every one of you who supports me here on Patreon. And I really, really, really do appreciate you all. So this episode is probably going to be the last episode for 2023. And looking ahead to 2024, I have a list of 6 books that I know I definitely want to read. They're in my wish list, and I'm very serious. I probably will purchase them in the next week or so. Or I'm holding off only in the event that some kind, loving person in my life asks me what I want for Christmas. That's not an article of clothing. I kind of showed my husband some boots I wanted. But really, I'm very, very simple, very easy to please. I told my kids I need a new immersion blender because I broke the one that we had. But because they love when I make sauces and soups. Okay, maybe not so much, but they will as soon as I get better at it. But anyway, I digress. So 2023, what were the books that impacted me the most? I'm sitting here looking across my office at a stack of books, and in that stack, most of them are books about women in the Bible. And then I have another stack that's all my marriage coaching books, because I've come to realize, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before, maybe not recently, but I've definitely shared it before, that in the marriage coaching world, there's a lot of bad information. I mean, I know we talk about bad theology and cultural Christianity over here on No More Silos, but my husband and I are launching a podcast, hopefully soon, that will dovetail nicely with our coaching ministry to talk about some of the things that are going on. I mean, there are books that I swear, they just made stuff up, and it's so damaging. Just so damaging and so not helpful to men and women in marriages that have people thinking they're doing it wrong, or that they are doing marriage wrong, that they are not living up to expectations. And a lot of stuff is very cultural, very made up, very harmful, and not actually what's in the Bible. Or let me put it this way, because we talk about this a lot here on No More Silos. It's in the Bible. It's taken way out of context. So I have a whole stack of those books, and I'll talk about those another time. And then I have my stack of books that are about women in the Bible, and books like Finding Phoebe and Paul and Gender and The Desert Mothers. These are not women necessarily in the Bible. These are women who lived in the first couple of centuries. And I've talked about all of these books on the podcast before. I think the most impactful of those books this year would be the new book, 2 new books that I got, The Bible and Biblical Womanhood by Philip Payne. And what he does is he reiterates some of the things. Apparently he's got this 500-page, really big book that he wrote a number of years ago, very detailed, very in the weeds, and he summarizes and highlights in this much more accessible book, the Bible versus Biblical Womanhood, but he is quoted often by some of the other authors that I've been reading for the last few years. So his book was one of those books that I bought because everybody else is quoting him, so I wanted to have the source. But Finding Phoebe came out this year, which was really great. Tell Her Story by Nijay Gupta, I've talked about here on the podcast. Those were really great. But if I had to narrow down to just, let's see, what do I have on my list? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 books that personally, for my own personal discipleship growth and spiritual formation, not just the work I'm doing here on No More Silos, not just the discipleship course work that I'm doing with Seminary Saturdays, not just the Bible study work that I'm doing at our church or small groups, but for me, Erika, the books that really impacted me personally the most and why they are right on my desk and have managed to stay there for the last several months. That is Being God's Image by Carmen Imes. I've literally, as I've taken road trips to go visit my daughter in college or pick her up or drop her off, I have sought out where she has been interviewed on other people's podcasts, talking about being God's image, and her book about creation, Why Creation Still Matters, that came out this year, but also her previous book, Bearing God's Image. There's a number of episodes where she was out talking about that. And there's a third book coming, I understand, in that, and it's going to be kind of a trilogy. I think in the next year or two, that's supposed to be coming from Dr. Imes. But what she has done for the study of creation has really helped me understand better the beginning. From a biblical standpoint, being able to articulate the creation story in a way that extends into discipleship, extends into other areas of my life, extends into how I walk this out and how I communicate with my children. This very useful, great book. And very accessible because she uses the Bible Project videos, which I love. I've been talking about Bible Project since this podcast started, even before. Bible Project was a very big part of my personal deconstruction and reconstruction journey. And so it's very important to me. It was actually pretty cool to me to see that she used the videos in her book to help make it even more accessible to the average person, average Christian. The second book is on the other end of that spectrum, but just as impactful, and that is Scott McKnight's Revelation for the Rest of Us. I discovered Scott McKnight on Twitter before it became the social media site that shall not be named. I discovered his Substack. I signed up for it. He is a theologian, is well respected and he gives very practical theological insight. And in this book, Revelation for the Rest of Us, and I purchased his translation of the New Testament too this year, which I found also very helpful. I just love collecting Bibles. If somebody's got to collect, different things, I collect Bibles. I've got all sorts of different translations of the Bible sitting on my shelf because, you can never have too many Bibles lying around, right? But in Revelation for the Rest of Us, he takes what is usually considered one of the more complicated books of the Bible because it is an apocalypse as its genre. It is something that is unique in our Western understanding because we don't really have that genre of literature in Western writing in English. We don't go around writing apocalyptic literature like they did in the Near Eastern ancient world, where people were concerned with all of that. And he dispels some of the notions around the theology and the theological perspectives on end times and eschatology in a way that I was actually able to understand. And I will admit, I don't understand every single thing about theology. Some things I'm still hacking away at it, trying to figure it out. And Revelation was one of those things. Eschatology did not really make sense to me. And because of his work and the work of some others like N.T. Wright, and again, the Bible Project, I was able to kind of pull this together better in understanding discipleship and where that, from the perspective of Revelation. It is not something for us to sit there and go, ooh, it's too complicated to understand, I'm just going to ignore it, but rather see the opportunity in sharing about what Jesus meant when he said, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We're supposed to be doing something now. We're supposed to be discipling now. We're supposed to be addressing the world's problems and issues now, not looking for the escape hatch to heaven. And I think he does that very well in that book. And I personally found it very helpful for me personally. The other book I thought was really, really cool was The Great Dechurching. And The Great Dechurching, it's a narrative-based recounting of current statistics on why people stop going to church. Now, the focus is narrowly to the evangelical church. So they're, although they also capture data on Roman Catholics and the mainline Protestants. But the chapter that they have on people of color, on Black, Indigenous people of color, the BIPOC chapter, was quite fascinating. I really was able to identify with the caricature of the person that they developed based on their statistics, based on their research there. I see that person. It also, of course, helped that the person was based here in Atlanta, where I'm at. So it was like, I know that guy. I know that person. But the Great Dechurching was really, really helpful for me to be able to articulate what is going on in the church, because our church, our ministry isn't one that is a mainline Protestant group. We're non-denominational. I grew up Baptist. I went to missionary Baptist churches pretty much most of my life until well after I got married. And then I went off into the non-denominational world where it seems like anything goes. But what I've discovered in the non-denominational world is people are much more free with sharing the fact that they've experienced church hurt, sharing the fact that they would prefer not to go to church anymore, but they really want their children to have a similar upbringing that they had, so they want them to go to church. So they're trying to find a church that gives them the warm and fuzzies of that church lifestyle, without actually doing the church things that they were subjected to as a child. It's a little confusing to walk through that with people, but I get it. A lot of the folks, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before, a lot of the folks that I met when I was homeschooling my kids were people who would fall into the category of de-churched Black people, where it was like, I went to church, I became an adult, I stopped going because I didn't have to go. But now I'm married and I've got some kids and I want them to go. But how do I get them to go when I don't want to go? And I haven't dealt with my issues about why I don't want to go. That's a whole thing, y'all. And it's definitely one worth understanding. But the overarching reason why people have left church is love. Love, a lack of love, like literally not being able to connect the dots between spiritual maturity as believers and what we are supposed to be doing with and for the people in our church communities. And so people left for things that, and this is something that I didn't really recognize till I was on the PTA at my kids' school. So I probably just confused a bunch of y'all with the PTA in school and homeschooling. Let me back up just a quick moment here. Side note, I've got 4 kids. Each kid is an individual. Some kids have been homeschooled more than others. Some kids have spent more time in public school. My oldest only spent 1 year homeschooling. That was 5th grade. After that, he was like, yeah, I think I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to stick it out in public school. And that's what he did. My youngest did kindergarten and then was home through the rest of elementary school and then didn't go to public school till middle school. The other 2 in the middle, they've been in and out. So the times when they are in public school, I participate and engage, as I do now. Everybody's in public school right now that's of school age. And so I participate with the parent organizations and get involved. And one of the things that I noticed, or I should say didn't notice until I was involved in a PTA, was that the PTA comes with a fee for membership. The membership is something small, like $8 to $10. But if you're going to a school where a significant population within the school, $8 to $10 is a lot of money. And parents work multiple jobs and they can't participate. But then the other parents who are on the PTA are demonizing those parents for not paying for the membership or not signing up to volunteer. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, wait a minute. What can we do to engage those parents who can't afford the $8? Can we do a scholarship or something with dignity that addresses that? And so one of the things that was so confirming in the Great Dechurching was realizing that we have built an American, and I don't want to say realizing because I kind of knew this but didn't have all the words around it or the data to back it up, what I was noticing. In the American church, black and white or whatever, we have created a system where you have to be middle to upper middle class in order to participate, work a corporate job, and have a stay-at-home wife. And what I mean by that is we want people to volunteer. We want people to serve. We make them feel bad if they don't. We want them to give. We make them feel bad if they don't. Instead of teaching generosity, we're focused on numbers, how many people showed up, how many people gave, how many people are participating. And really what we should be noticing is how do we teach generosity in a way that encourages both children and adults and everybody in between to see the person who's not seen. The word to know in the Old Testament means to see. The first time God is named in the Old Testament by Hagar in Genesis is the God who sees. The word in Genesis 4, when Adam knew Eve, is the same word in Hebrew found in Psalms 139 when David says that God knows him. God, you know me. When he's praying to God, he's like, you really know me, God. You know my innermost parts. You know who I am at my core. When Adam knew his wife Eve, it's that level of intimacy. And it's not about sexual relations. It is about intimacy in your heart, intimacy of your mind. It is emotional intimacy. And so in years past, when my favorite book or most impactful book of the year would have been Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, it's that looking beneath the iceberg, looking beneath the surface. What is really going on that this person can't pay the $8 fee? What is really going on that this person doesn't have the bandwidth in their life to participate or sign up? Or why are they coming to church late every Sunday? Now, some of y'all just oversleep. But there's other people for whom getting to church on Sunday is a real struggle. It's a struggle emotionally, mentally. It could be a literal physical struggle. They don't have reliable transportation. When I was growing up, we had a church van, and there was a deacon who drove the church van and went around and picked people up, the older people or kids, to come to Sunday school and come to church. And there's still churches today that do that. But a lot of our American churches, we don't do that anymore. And a big part of it is we just don't have the ability to do that, in the sense that there's not like a single stop that you can go and go round up some folks. That's not the lifestyle of most of us these days. People are not going to do that, but they'll watch your video. They'll watch the reel. They'll follow you on social media. So how do you do that? And so the Great Dechurching really has given us a better context, I think, given me the words that I need to articulate to our staff and church leaders about what it means to be engaged in 2024, going into 2024 in our ministry. And so that I found really, really helpful, and helped me to understand friends who've left the church. It's like, you know what, maybe this is part of it. One of the things that I don't want to use the word complain about. It's one of the things that I find most disappointing. Is that the right word? I don't know. That irks me is when people only want to talk to senior leadership in the church. They don't want to talk to any one of the other 5 people on the pastoral staff or church leaders or ministers. They only want to engage and talk with the pastor or with the pastor's wife. And I find that difficult because that's not what church is about. It's not about me or my husband. It's about the community. And when you're talking when you're talking about building community in your church, we've got to do a better job of communicating that it's all of us. Everyone matters. And so you can talk to any one of us and then have in place with your leadership team and staff a way to escalate serious issues, but only wanting to talk to the senior leadership and not really wanting to engage with anyone else in the church actually hurts your discipleship. And we have people like that in our church now, and it breaks my heart. It's like they only talk to me or my husband. They don't seem to really be interested in hanging out with anybody else, and they don't participate in any of the small groups. And there's no financial issue. There isn't. They seem, generally okay. But maybe not. Maybe there's something we're missing there. I don't know. I don't know how to engage them more. I think it at some point it's on them to want to engage, and for us to communicate the why behind that. And that's how one of the books that I came across, not this year, but last year, but I think I skimmed it last year and really read it more this year, The Forgotten Ways by Alan Hirsch, was very helpful in that. So, Being God's Image, Revelation for the Rest of Us, The Great Dechurching, the last book on my list of most impactful to me personally that I think was really just a big, big deal is The Garden Within by Anita Phillips. Dr. Anita Phillips wrote The Garden Within. It came out in October. I had the opportunity to see her in person speak about it at an event at another church. It was such a blessing, such a blessing. There's so much that is going on in this book that I think, and I've recommended it to a bunch of people. In fact, I recommended it. I have about 5 women in our church right now reading it so that we can have a small group conversation about it, kind of book club like. And then depending upon the outcome of that conversation, we may record us talking about it intentionally, like a panel discussion, so that we can put that content out there for our community. Because sometimes, like I just said, there's some folks who are not going to join a small group and they're going to miss out on those kinds of conversations. So we're trying to figure out ways to engage and connect with people, and that is one of the ways we're going to do that. But her book was really, really impactful. Let me tell you a little bit about one of the things that goes on in that book. So in this book, she talks about, she asks the question, how does your garden grow? So much of the best God has for us is captured in the creation story in Genesis. The tree of life, the garden, community, relationships, walking with God, our purpose, and our legacy. This is why I was so intrigued with Being God's Image by Dr. Carmen Imes, because I've read that, and then here comes Dr. Anita Phillips with the practical application of it all. She points out that your heart is the soil of your life. And then she gives 4 steps to starting your own garden. 4 steps to realizing that your garden within, your personal Eden matters, and how to navigate your life with that. And she gives a lot more in it, but I just want to share with you some of the things that she talks about, these 4 steps to starting a garden. Decide what you want to grow. Decide what you want to grow. Are you looking for, and this might be your 2024, so this might be the book that you got to go get. What are your relationship goals? What are your purpose goals? What are your legacy goals? And then she says, prepare your location. Well, she talks about it again in the context of a garden. Remove the debris and the weeds. Test your soil. She talks about embodied faith. One of the things that, as I'm recording this, it's a couple of weeks before Christmas. We're talking about the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the embodiment of Jesus, the embodiment of God into human form. That is the point of creation. How do we have embodied faith, body awareness, feeling the pain, feeling the joy? God gave us feelings. We see that through the Psalms. Someone sent me something yesterday that talked about how we don't spend enough time lamenting in the body of Christ. There's a whole book on it in the Bible, Lamentations, but we don't spend time helping people navigate how to get out of the funk that they're in, get out of the pain or move past the pain, or to sit in the pain for a season, and that it's okay to feel it. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and okay to feel joy. The fruit of the Spirit involves joy. Joy is not happiness. Joy is knowing that God is. And then she talks about self-care in the context of setting up a watering system. What do you do to regularly replenish yourself emotionally? What do you do to water your need for connection, for safety, for productivity, for creativity? We talk about having a Sabbath, and there's no end to the Sabbath. And the seventh day doesn't have an ending. And Jesus invites us into fellowship with him in resting from a perspective and a position of rest. The reason we continue to honor the Sabbath, even as Christians, is not that we're honoring a particular day in a regimented, legalistic way, but that we are honoring that God made us to be productive, but from a place of rest. So we have to water this need for productivity, for safety, for connection, for creativity. And then what new activities would you like to incorporate into your self-care watering system? And then finally, plant your seeds. Once you've got all that together, your location, your watering system, your decision about what it is you're growing next in the new year, in 2024, plant your seeds. What do I believe about myself? She asks. What beliefs about myself am I struggling with? What do I believe about how God shows up in my life? What do I believe about how God sees me? What new beliefs would I like to plant instead? And so in those 4 steps to starting your own garden, Dr. Anita Phillips walks us through tending an embodied garden, seeing Psalm 139:14 as our own. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. The Hebrew word for to know by experience, because there's knowing from an intimacy standpoint, but then there's yada, which is knowing by experience, and how it's used here to praise God. It makes me think that knowing and experiencing God is a reason to praise him. Those are just the thoughts that I had in looking a little bit further into that. But basic care, start that, turn over that as you embark the new year. Like basic care, like sleep, hydrate, don't forget to eat. She gives you all of this in that book. So it is the book that I would say, if I had to pick one, would be the number one book that I read this year that took everything else, being God's image, revelation for the rest of us, and the great dechurching, and really put it together with action steps on what to do next. So now, what am I going to read in 2024? Well, thinking about my garden, the books that I want to start with in 2024, the first one, and again, I might buy this before, it just came out in November. It's called The Sisterhood, How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture, by Courtney Thorson. And what it says here on Amazon, and I'm just going to read what it says here on Amazon for you, because I think if you're like me and you grew up in the 70s and 80s, young adulthood into the 90s, you will recognize some of these names. As a literature major, and specifically African American literature was my focus in an undergrad, these were the people who wrote the articles and the books that I was reading, the poetry, the outlook on life, the questions that I had were answered. And it's a big part of my spiritual formation, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So the blurb description on Amazon says this: one Sunday afternoon in February 1977, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Ntozake Shange, and several other Black women writers met at June Jordan's Brooklyn apartment to eat gumbo, drink champagne, and talk about their work. Calling themselves the Sisterhood, the group, which also came to include Audre Lorde, Paula Marshall, Margot Jefferson, and others, would get together once a month over the next 2 years, creating a vital space for Black women to discuss literature and liberation. The Sisterhood tells the story of how this remarkable community transformed American writing and cultural institutions, drawing on original interviews with Sisterhood members as well as correspondence, meeting minutes, and reading of their works. Courtney Thorson explores the group's everyday collaboration and profound legacy. The Sisterhood advocated for Black women writers at trade publishers and magazines such as Random House, Ms., and Essence, and eventually in academic departments as well, often in the face of sexist, racist, and homophobic backlash. Thorson traces the personal, professional, and political ties that brought the group together, as well as the reasons for its dissolution. She considers the popular and critical success of Sisterhood members in the 1980s, the uneasy absorption of Black feminism into the academy, and how younger writers built on the foundations of the group laid, highlighting the organizing, networking, and community building that nurtured Black women's writing. This book demonstrates that the Sisterhood offers an enduring model for Black feminist collaboration. Doesn't that just make you want to read it? Now, granted, I saw someone I follow, a theologian, a Black female theologian that I follow on social media, actually recommended the book. She's mentioned in the book. She had been a writer for Essence at the time all of this was going on, and she was a beneficiary of this work, of this great work. And what she noted in her social media post that alerted me to this book, and why I added it to my Amazon wish list, is that before she switched gears or evolved or made the change into theology as her writing focus, she was one of these writers. She was one of these Black feminist writers. And one of the things I've talked about here on the podcast on No More Silos is about womanist theology. And it is important for us to understand that there's liberation theology, there's womanist theology, there's different ways that people view God and understand God. And so it's important for us to consider the intersection of faith and gender, political perspective, race, all of those things, how all of that impacts what we think and understand about God. So The Sisterhood is one such book that I want to check out because for me, these are the women I was reading in college, whose works I was reading in college, and impacted a big part of how I view things and how I came to understand even my own faith. The next book that I want to share is called Nobody's Mother. And since I am literally looking through my Amazon wish list, I am going to click on that, tell you a little bit more about it. It's been quoted. A few of the Substacks that I follow have been talking about it quite a bit, sharing excerpts. The book is by Sandra Glenn. Nobody's Mother, the full title is Artemis of the Ephesians in Antiquity and the New Testament. And this book came out in October. The last book I mentioned, Sisterhood, just came out in November and was mentioned. This book, the Amazon description says, some Christians think Paul's reference to saved through childbearing in 1 Timothy 2:15 means that women are slated primarily for delivering and raising children. Alternate readings, however, sometimes fail to build on the best historical and textual evidence. Sandra Gland thinks that we have misunderstood Paul by misunderstanding the context to which he wrote. A key to the reading and applying 1 Timothy, Gland argues, lies in getting to know a mysterious figure who haunts the letter, the goddess Artemis. And so, and there's more there, but I want to keep moving here. She's being referenced in quite a few different blog posts from folks that I follow. So I want to get this book and add it to my collection of authors who are writing about the views of women, or how women are viewed in Scripture, because so many of our challenges in marriage theology, Christian marriage theology, happen because of misunderstandings of what's actually going on in the text, what Paul is really saying. And it's been surprising to me as I've continued my research how much has been written in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years that has gone ignored by large swaths of the evangelical church or the mainline Protestant churches. How much a lot of churches are just ignoring that and continue to live and breathe in these cultural Christian tropes and made-up-isms about who God is and about women in the Bible. One of the other books that is really interesting to me, and this is because I'm a once a homeschool mom, always a homeschool mom, right? That's what my kids say. They love breaks and holidays when I hand them things to read. But there's a cultural history of report cards. And there's a book by Wade Morris called just that, Report Cards, A Cultural History. I heard about this by the local educational blogger for our local paper, the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, and she wrote about it a while back. This book came out, it came out this year, but I don't see where on Amazon. It's not saying when. But basically, it's the history of report cards, which is also the history of the educational system in the United States. And I think it's worthwhile understanding because as our educational system goes, so goes our Christian discipleship efforts, because a lot of times churches and people disciple within the context of how they understand equipping and educating is supposed to work. And we've done some really wacky stuff over the years for some really equally wacky reasons. When I was a homeschooling parent, I did not do grades. It drove my kids crazy because especially the ones that were in and out or had already been exposed to the public school system. And so they were looking for, did I get an A? Did I get a B? Did I get a C? And I'm like, listen, all this is pass or fail. Either you got it or you don't. We don't move on until you get it. And if you get it, we move quickly. That's one of the things I loved about homeschooling, because if you got the concept, we could move on to the next thing. We weren't, beating a dead horse here. But if you didn't get it, then that was cause for, well, how important is this? Do you really need to know this? Is this going to matter when you're 25? Can we get away with a less detailed knowing of this? And then we'll circle back to it later at a later time. Maybe this isn't your thing. One of the things that we did that with was the solar system. I think I covered the solar system maybe a total of 2 times. There was, here are the planets, and let's name them, and this is the solar system and what it is. And then there was, hey, here's an in-depth thing, and we're going to watch these videos from NASA about the solar system and read this book. Because I noticed in the state standard curriculum, they covered the solar system every other year in elementary school. Literally every other year it was covered in elementary school. And so that was boring for my older kids because they're like, oh, Mom, we covered this. We did this already. Okay, well, how do I do this differently? So the history of report cards, I'm looking forward to reading that because I think it's going to be fascinating. That's just me nerding out on how education works and ties together. The other book that I'm interested in reading that I haven't had time to read yet, and so I haven't bought it yet, is Skye Jethani's latest in his series, What if God was serious? What if Jesus was serious series? And this one is about heaven. We do a lot of funerals from time to time, they come in spurts. And one of the things that me personally, from a No More Silos standpoint, I find interesting is the way we do funerals in our culture, in our American culture. Sometimes they're really celebrations, and then other times it is genuinely depressing. But the thing that irks me the most from a theological standpoint is what people really believe about heaven. The Bible Project has a great video on heaven and earth, and I wish I could send that to everybody. But what I tell my kids is, heaven is not a place we escape to. Heaven is coming here. We're not escaping to it. Somebody made up rapture theology in the 1880s, and our imaginations took off with it. So there's been a bunch of books and movies. So I'm interested in how Skye Jethani puts that together, because I like the way he does it in his other books. The next book that I'm really looking forward to, because I'm a huge fan of John Mark Comer. In fact, on our Patreon page, we do a deep dive in Ruthless Elimination. I can't even say it. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. His book that I read a few years ago, and then another one, Live No Lies, that I've referenced here on the podcast. But so his new book is called Practicing the Way, and he's really looking at how to practice Christianity. And so I'm interested in seeing what he's come up with for that. And I've seen a few interviews, and I am intrigued. My last book, number 6, is Mother's Tongue. And this one, let me see if I can pull this up. This is the last on my list of books that I'm very, very interested in reading in 2024, sooner than later. Mother Tongue, The Surprising History of Women's Words. The Surprising History of Women's Words by Jenny Nuttall. It came out in August, and what it is a linguistic journey through 1,000 years of feminist language. So we started with the sisterhood, talking about Black feminism, and now we're ending with women's words. The words we choose to use, whether we're speaking from the pulpit or platform, from a position of authority, how we frame women, how we frame people who are often not seen, how we talk about and ascribe dignity to some but not others, I think is going to be very important in this next year. And so understanding the journey, the historical journey of words that come from Old English to the present day, because English is the pool we're swimming in, right? Where I'm reading and writing in English. That's my language. And so I really want to be able to be more careful and be more in tune with, what does this word mean? Why am I using it? And how could I use a different word? But also being in a position to say, hey, this is not a word we want to use. I can teach my sons. And the influence that I have through No More Silos and our ministry, it matters. It really matters, the words that we use. And here's a word that I am aware of the history of, and that is the word hysterectomy, just to give you kind of a teaser of why this intrigues me. The word hysterectomy, which you may know means to surgically remove one's uterus, a woman's uterus, actually comes from the same root word, hysteria, because in menopause, as doctors were trying to understand it, or not trying hard enough apparently, they thought that removing the woman's uterus would calm her down. And so with stuff like that floating around in my head, I want to know more about these words that we use. It's a rich, provocative book for anyone who loves language. hand raised over here, and for feminists who want to look to the past in order to move forward. So it's a whopping 304 pages. Might take me a little bit to get through it, or I'll probably do what I usually do and jump around. Thank you so much for listening today on No More Silos as we talk about cultural Christianity and things related to it. I'm excited about the books that I want to read. The Sisterhood, Nobody's Mother, Was Jesus Really Serious About Heaven, Practicing the Way, Mother's Tongue, and Report Cards, A Cultural History. I am hopeful that you will find books like Being God's Image, Revelation for the Rest of Us, The Great Dechurching, and The Garden Within, that you will find those books will find their way to your bookshelf in the coming weeks and months, and you will find them as helpful as I did. Have a great, wonderful new year. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon subscribers who share with me on this journey through your support financially, your prayers, and also those who just support me by letting me know you're paying attention to what we've got going on over here at No More Silos. Thanks again, and Happy New Year.